It's 4 o'clock on Friday, and we are here to have a good time at the Taxi Quarantini Happy Hour. Woohoo! TGIF. And thank you, fake band. Thank you, fake audience. Hello, everybody. I'm hoping you guys can hear me and see me because I'm working with a new template, and I hope it's working. Can you guys see me? Please let me know that you can see me. It's working. Yay. All right. Man, what a day this has been. Woo. All right. I just realized it was like 4 o'clock and I ran downstairs. I was upstairs doing my hair and makeup. I came down and I chugged a little rock star and it went down the wrong way. So let me take a swig that goes down, hopefully the right way. Why, yes, it did. Okay, hello, Edmund Red, Scott Hansen, Andre Stepanian, Dan Weber, Jan Weilage, Martin Gravel, Cass McKenty, Darren Fletcher, Peter Rahill, Terrell Burt. Hey, Al. All. Slurp and burp. Yeah, the burp will be coming shortly, I'm sure, Nancy. Paul Etheridge, X-Rash. How do you say that? Hello from Antarctica. My goodness, you definitely win the prize for the farthest viewer. Is it... How do you say X-Rash? Is that it? Akira Kenyon, Tony Salazzo, Bob Gunnerfeld, Martin Gravel, Dean Turner, Jonathan Morse, Crash Gates. Okay, there you go. Crash. Oh, man. So let me mute my phone so we don't get ringing in the middle of the show or vibrations. Gotta have, hello, Robert Orzechowski. Hello from Ontario. Hello, Pierre Venio. Really? And are you like hunkered down at a nuclear missile silo or something? Here comes that burp. Excuse me. Oh, man, it's a good thing this isn't real TV. GOW Music, hello. Some like that or something like that. Randall Hurt, hello. So, what have I been doing today that's been so much fun? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Hello, Liz. I got the Roadcaster in. Hello, Patrick Adams. And, of course, I had to set it up. Hello, Peter Rahill. I had to set it up without reading any directions because, number one, I am a man, and that's what guys do, right? And number two, I figure, hell, if I can run an SSL, I can run this thing. Hello, Dan Weber, Darren Moss. So I got it working. Once I get it totally sussed out, hello, Spiritual, it's about 80% of the way there. I am very happy to report that, yes, I am going to be able to play music through, the audio. So we will no longer have to listen through the speakers. And let's see what else. I can run a phone into this thing live. I can run music simultaneously live. I can run a microphone into it live. And that's all good, and then it comes out of that thing into a USB, into Wirecast. The problem is it's got a noise floor that I can hear, and which was not reported by any of the other reviewers who all love this thing to death. And also there's some latency, which drives me a little crazy. So I've got to suss some stuff out. And in doing so, I messed up the template for Taxi TV. And then I reached out to Bria, and she was trying to walk me through. I couldn't get the microphone that I use every week. My AT2020 couldn't get that to show up. I was getting levels on the computer, but I was not getting any of the mic level into Wirecast, and I don't know why. I tried everything. So then I went to an old defunct template that I used to use on Taxi TV and changed the output settings to match the output settings video-wise to YouTube on the old template to match the most recent template. And that's what we're broadcasting on today. So yay me, I figured that out. Here, let me show you my new toy. I'm so excited. Yeah. There it is. So the cool thing is it's got some preloaded sound effects over here. And I can add other banks of sound effects. So I can put like the theme song in there. I can add clapping in there and wah, 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 wah. And then I can bring in microphones 1 through 4. I can bring in USB. I can bring in the phone through a mini jack, which I did. I'm not using the phone through the Bluetooth, even though it's capable of doing that, because why trust Bluetooth when I can make an actual hardwire connection? When in doubt, go with a wire, I always say. Now let me get my shot reset. Well, pretty close, gotta say. There we go. And for those of you who actually give a darn about stuff, yes, I bought some new flowers. Have they bloomed yet? Why, no, they have not. There we go. Looking pretty, huh? You know, back in my studio days, I always made sure to have incredibly good assistant engineers, and I much preferred to work at very high-level studios that had excellent maintenance staff. I'm good at like ripping a module out, swapping a module on a console, swapping out a record or a play card on a 24-track tape machine. I'm good at fixing glitchy faders and spraying knobs with Kremlin. I can do a lot of on-the-fly maintenance myself. But sometimes when there's an audio path problem, I'm just not smart enough to figure it out. So I don't know what to do. I've got to figure out this latency issue. I bought this thing used in like new condition from B&H Audio in New York, and I'm hoping that the previous owner didn't have a problem with this thing with the noise floor or the latency, and that's why they sent it back, because then I'd have to send it back. But I saved $80. It was normally like $5.99. And I got it for $5.08, so I saved actually $91. There you go. Yeah, the thing is called a Rodecaster, RODE, like as in Rode microphones. Yep, it's a Rodecaster, and it is specifically made to do either straight up podcasts. It's actually got a slot for an SD card, so you can have up to 4 microphones and the other elements brought in. And you could do a podcast with 4 people and have music and sound effects and call-ins and all that kind of stuff and record it right to the SD card and then upload it later. Or you can use it for a live stream such as Taxi TV. So once I get it all straightened out, I'm gonna be happening, but it's tough. Bria and Ariana are fairly techie, and when we were all in the office together, when there were problems, they were essentially my assistant engineers, as you've seen on camera several times. Liz has just taken over the show, and she is miles away from me, so she can't help me. I just have a feeling Liz might not be as techie as the youngins. Just guessing, Liz. Hope that's not offensive. Liz has many wonderful qualities. Fixing rockets is probably not one of them. Anyway, so that's that. Liz is probably crying now. Oh, no, she says, good guess. Well, she can run an iMac, that much I know. Yeah, I don't think I ever read the manual for when I got my first SSL, man. I just turned it on and figured stuff out. Sometimes I would open the manual mainly for the computer, the built-in computer that was on it, because it was still actually, it was 1984, I think, and it was still pretty early days for computers, and SSL had an onboard computer that more or less operated like a DOS computer, really didn't have much, it wasn't like a Mac. And I did, at that time in 1984 in my office, I didn't even have a computer yet. So technically, the first computer I ever learned to operate was the one built into the SSL. And that was just a monochrome, the green against black kind of screen. And it was good. I mean, the automation worked fairly well on it, and other stuff that you could do with the onboard computer. But as far as the audio stuff on an SSL, I figured it out pretty quickly. Hopefully I'll be able to figure this thing out without launching it through the plate glass window that sits about 10 feet away from me. Oh, man. JP okay? Anyone know? I haven't heard from him in a couple of days. I noticed he wasn't here yesterday. I hope he's fine. Yep, Liz is simply amazing. That's her last name, is simply, well, simply is her middle name and amazing is her last name. Did you download new firmware for your Rodecaster? I don't know which firmware it has. I haven't downloaded the app yet, so I haven't had it talking to, its app on my computer yet, so I will check that out. Go for the hammer. Yep. Oh, good. Cass says JP and I have been emailing back and forth yesterday, so that's good. At least we know his hands are working. So I want to pick up where we left off yesterday. We had some questions. And the one that I didn't get to yesterday, I can't remember who asked this. Somebody asked how to mix jazz. Who was that? Gotta say, my hair came out good today. I hate the delay in the chat room. It's like the latency. Pierre, I think you might be right. Pierre must be grabbing a snack. Everybody's saying, yeah, it was Pierre, right? But Pierre's not responding. I'd like to know. Okay. Okay, so how do you mix jazz? I am not a legitimate jazz expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I have done several jazz projects, a couple of complete jazz albums, and if I had to give an overarching statement, it would be it's completely different from doing pop, it's completely different from doing rock. Most of the time, in my experience, and granted, this was like 35, 40 years ago. Hello, Rick White. The goal was to make it sound natural. Like a bunch of musicians in a jazz club or in a studio playing and looking at each other and feeling the vibe and, not effects. Now, you could say, I remember that I actually was a business major and a music minor in college. So I took a lot of jazz classes, and my suite mates in college were jazz majors, and I was friends with all the people in the jazz program at the University of Miami, which is one of the better music programs in the country. At the time, it was one of few. There weren't a lot of real music programs in the country. And Jerry Mulligan was not the dean, but he was like the, whatever in residence. Remember Jerry Mulligan, the jazz sax player? Really cool guy. So I learned a lot about jazz. As a matter of fact, Pat Metheny was really good friends with one of my suite mates, and it was not unusual for me to come back from class, like I actually went, but, come back to the room anyway in the dorm. And there would be Pat Metheny and a couple of other guys. We had two rooms connected by a bathroom. And I remember one time coming back and Pat Metheny had an amp. It was a Baldwin. I want to say it was a Baldwin guitar amp, which is kind of funny, in the shower. And they didn't have a drummer, but they did have a guy named Rich playing bass and a guy named Brent playing guitar on a black Les Paul. What's the, like, Super Deluxe or something like that? I don't know. Like, the most tricked out Les Paul you could buy, black with a little white trim or kind of ivory colored trim around it and gold pickups on it. So I got a bit of a pedigree on jazz in college, and then when I started working at Criteria, my boss, Mac Emmerman, used to donate like 1,000 hours of studio time a year to the U of M jazz band, and they would come in and do like big band things. So I was his assistant engineer on 2 of those recordings, I think. And what else did I... Oh, remember the Jackie Gleason show with the June Taylor dancers? Well, Jackie Gleason lived, I want to say it was called Inverary. I think he might have owned that piece of real estate. It was like a big kind of housing development built around a golf course, and Jackie Gleason lived there. So whenever he wanted to record new tracks for the show, they would actually come to Criteria and have like 30, 40, 50 pieces in Studio A, which was a big room, and it had a big live section. It had movable walls, and you could move out the walls, and go for a big live sound. So I had a lot of jazz under my belt as a student, as an assistant engineer. And then when I worked at Triad Recording in Fort Lauderdale, that's when I worked with Ernest Ranglin, the Jamaican jazz guitar guy. And there were a time or two where Jaco Pastorius was jamming with a couple of the other guys from Weather Report in the empty warehouse right next door to my studio, and got to work on that a bit. Actually ended up using Jaco. Jaco Pastorius used to play bass on local bands that or local solo artists that I would produce and hire the players for. And there were probably 3 different times that I paid Jaco like $50 a song to play on stuff. People were like, "Calm down, Jaco. We just need boom, 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 not." Oh man, Bob Gunnerfeld had a great uncle who was a writer on the Jackie Gleason show. Cool. Yep, Jaco on bass on demos. Somewhere in my stash of old recordings, I've got some Jaco, like just sitting out in my studio, plugged into an old Ampeg, I can't remember the model, but it was an Ampeg bass amp. And Jaco, if we had a down day at the studio and he was next door, sometimes he would just drift in, bring his bass, which was all beat to hell. And just plug in and start jamming, and I'd open up a room mic and just record them. So anyway, that was cool. Yeah, with Jaco, no need for a guitar player or a drummer. Could have been an Ampeg B15. I don't know. It did have a single 15, so maybe there you go. That makes sense. The B stood for bass, and 15 was the size of the speaker. Makes perfect sense. So what do I know about jazz with that very long lead in? I just want to give my, show you guys my cred. Natural. That's the word. Jazz people wanted to sound natural. They didn't like a lot of EQ. They didn't like a lot of compression. They liked reverb sometimes. But they wanted it to sound natural and not, it wasn't the kind of session where like you would hit the tape really hard and go for the warmth of the tape. Wouldn't hit the preamps. It was all about clarity and air. So that's the recording side. And the mixing side, quite frankly, with jazz, was basically get a good balance amongst the players. And then really all you had to do was bring up the occasional fader for like a sax solo or a guitar solo or a piano solo or something. Basically, everything was kind of a static mix. You could shut your eyes and see the players out in the room, which goes back to what we were talking about yesterday as far as like where people fit on the kind of on that visual oral horizon. And then just ride up the solos. That was it. You know what the hardest part working with jazz players was? That whenever, sometimes they would do like a 7 minute song, and they were just taking, trading solos at the end, which would most of the time be a fade out back in those days. But sometimes they would do a button ending, and the jazz guys, I don't know why, but they could not, for the life of them, stay quiet during the ring out of the last notes. It was a cough, it was a chair squeak, it was a hand brushing against guitar strings, it was drumsticks being put down on the floor tom. So there were many times I remember, especially on the Ernest Ranglin record, where I'd go, guys, you blew the ending. And then I'd have to have them go back to, like just the last chorus for, the outro, and do that again, and then go, okay, shh, be quiet, and then just cut the 24 track and slap that on there. Balance is key, yep, and a bit of compression. That was about it. In the compression, really, it was more about limiting than it was compression. I mean, they didn't want, like, I had a, what was it, a Yamaha 6 or, I don't know, 7 foot something grand piano. I can't remember the model number, but the size was around 7 feet, I want to say. It's fairly big. And they didn't want the piano to sound like Elton John, They didn't want a lot of top end on it. They didn't want any compression on it. So basically, you would set limiters so that if somebody, had a moment where they whacked a guitar chord a little harder than they should, it would catch it so it wouldn't eat up the meters. Yeah, that sounds about right. A Yamaha C4. That sounds good. It was black, and it said Yamaha. I remember it sounded great. Not as good as Criteria had a grand piano that, if I remember, it was maybe a Baldwin. That's the one that you hear on Layla. You hear it on Allman Brothers stuff. You hear it on just like all the big hits that came out of Criteria had that grand piano on it. And my Yamaha, as nice as it was, people always complimented the sound, but it was probably because of my really incredible engineering. I'm kidding, of course. The piano just sounded great. You really couldn't screw up the sound of that piano, but it did not sound as good as the Criteria piano. So there you go. That's what I know about jazz. Give it air, give it space, don't put effects on it. Now, I did mention earlier that the jazz I listened to while I was in college and in the early days of my Criteria days was, I would listen to like Chick Corea, Light as a Feather, Stanley Clarke stuff. And that stuff was, is it fair to say it was like fusion to some degree? It wasn't straight ahead, just like purist jazz, right? And they would introduce instruments that probably were more affected. Let's see. What differences with mics on each sax voice, alto, tenor, etc.? I'm the kind of guy that if I am overdubbing horns, I much prefer to have the horns stand in a semicircle, sometimes even a circle. If I had like 4, 5, 6 horns, I would have them stand in like a 10-foot circle and look at each other and blow at each other and take an 87 and put it into Omni, or a 414 in Omni, and put it right in the middle of them, and then go in the control room and listen. And if I heard too much of one thing or another thing, I would just move the mic around until I got a natural balance. Then have everybody drop a coin by their left toe so when they went back out, they could stand in the same place. Same thing was true for a, like 4-piece horn section. I would have them stand in a semicircle and probably have the mic in cardioid at that point. Sometimes I would individually mic things just to make the producer happy or make the players happy, and rarely, if ever, did those individual mics ever make it to the final mixes. There's just something about what happens with, the air and the notes and the harmonics that all blend together in a natural setting like that to my ear just sounds better. What else? Nothing else I can really tell you about that. A 414 for horns? Yeah, 414 sound great on everything. It's a great mic. Slightly bright on the top end, but you know what? Sometimes you need it. Never use an XY Sheps for horns. And the reason being that, think about that, if you're doing an XY stereo spread and recording, let's say, 4 horns in a semicircle, you could end up with the trumpet and the tenor on the left and the alto and whatever on the right. It goes back to what we were talking about yesterday. It just didn't sound that natural. So I would record them in a semicircle with an Omni microphone, and if it was the kind of part where you wanted it to sound big bandy, sometimes I would do a second pass and pan them left and right. If it was just little, like Philly soul kind of stuff where they're doing whap, whap, I would very, very often put those in mono and just send them down the middle, and then possibly a very slight delay to the outside, or even better, an EMT plate reverb with the 2 returns going far left and right. So horns down the middle, reverb out there, and just a hint of reverb, just enough where you could hear it. And frankly, I don't know if the public ever heard it, but an engineer would hear it. And what it did was give the horns space, put them in a space, okay? Do you think that with all the effects put on music these days, the true feeling of the creation is lost? Forget about the money? Maybe. It depends on the kind of music, depends on the song, depends on the arrangement, depends on the production. Some things are made better by effects, but yeah, you couldn't take a straight up jazz record and put effects on it, and maybe some people have altered them with effects in a good way. I don't know. I personally wouldn't know how to approach that. I guess I could figure it out if it were a client demand that I was trying to meet. Okay, enough of that jazz stuff. Enough of all that jazz. Let's see, where was I? Still see a lot of people, this is Andre Stepanian asked this yesterday, I still see a lot of people in the forum asking and / confused about current sounding. Yes, that is a point of contention, no question. Not sure if the piece of music, sounds, or instrumentation, or all the above, so maybe you could discuss a little bit. Thank you. Well, you're welcome, Andre. Honestly, current sounding... trying to describe current sounding is so hard. It's not as easy as saying, well, make sure you have current sounding synth patches, or make sure that you're using reverb that doesn't sound like a dated form of reverb. Like spring reverb usually connotates a throwback to the 60s, maybe early 70s. So if you use that maybe as an effect, yes, on a guitar, maybe if there was a part that was like a surf Fender guitar, surf rocky part in an indie pop song, you might throw spring reverb on it. But your choice of reverb, the amount of delay, the sounds of the instruments, but there are other things that go into what makes something sound current and contemporary, like the melodies. People in Nashville almost all the time want to hear fresh melodies. What do they mean by fresh melodies? Something that when you hear it, you don't go, oh, yeah, that sounds like Garth would have done that. And that's tough, there just aren't that many notes on the scale. So you have to come up with a fresh approach and do stuff that's a little bit genre bending. To make it sound not only current, whatever we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, whatever you hear on the radio or on playlist today was probably recorded some time ago. If it comes out on a major record label, it's probably recorded a year and a half ago. So your job with currency is to make sure that you're listening to what's out there today, and then when you sit down to do your own stuff, that you're taking that as your baseline. And I don't mean this kind of bass line, I mean like BASE line. And then do little things that are a little genre bending, not gender bending, but genre bending, to push it forward, but without making it sound too wacky. And something else, 2 other things. As far as lyrics and vocal approach goes to make something sound current, think about it. If you took lyrics from the 70s, like the song Afternoon Delight, or something by, what's his name, John Denver, Rocky Mountain High, um, even, even like Eagles stuff. As great a lyricist as Don Henley is and Glenn Frey was, their lyrics wouldn't be considered current today. So lyrics have a style. There's a fashion to them. So you want to imitate the current fashion that's out there, but again, push the envelope a little bit so that you're not putting stuff out today that sounds like it was done. Pierre says just add a few curse words. And Tony says +1 lyrics can be very time specific. Let's talk about time in the context of rhythm. As Robin Frederick frequently points out, today's lyrics are just sung differently. They're maybe more alliterative. The consonants or word starts happen on beats or in ands of beats that they didn't used to back in the day. So all those things need to be studied. But the single best thing you can do, the single best thing that you can do to make your stuff sound current is just immerse yourself in current music. It gets absorbed. It really does. You don't even realize it probably, excuse me, but by osmosis, you're absorbing it, and it just comes back out of you. Garbage in, garbage out. I don't know what the opposite of that is, but that's what you're looking for. So there you go. Interesting. Pat, hello, Socorro. Pat Patterson is kind of considered a lyric genius. I know him well. He speaks at the Road Rally very often. And I'm surprised he doesn't talk about opening lines, because not unlike marketing, in marketing, the rule of thumb is, in the context of a web page or print ad, the headline's only job is to get your attention, to make you stop moving forward looking at other stuff, make you stop right there, and its job, the headline's job, is to make you read the first line. The first line's job is to make you read the second line. The end of the first paragraph its job is to make you read the next paragraph. So that's not unlike good lyric writing. You want to keep the listener engaged and moving forward, rather than, writing something that is just easy to not pay attention to. So there you go. Good. Andre says he loves the current stuff, listens to it all the time. Patterson's classes were his favorite road rally classes. Hello, Linda Cullum. Hello, Ian Shortall. Rob, can you make a video about opening lines? My name's actually Michael. Unless you're talking to somebody in the chat room whose name is Rob. But yeah, my name's Michael. Rob Shirelli is a good friend of mine and a frequent guest on the show. Maybe you confused us. Dan Weber likes modern folk. Everything's so perfect, and that sounds great to me. Yeah, I like modern folk as well. It's funny, one of the classic definitions of folk music is that it should be about societal issues, societal change. Think about, who was the big folk guy? Can't think of his name, but even Peter, Paul, and Mary, all the great folk artists back then, Bob Dylan, who was folk-y, they sang about issues. And today, folk music, modern folk, is really Pete Seeger. There you go, great one. Who is Rob Frederick? It's Robin Frederick. She's a lady. Pete Seeger, yep. Woody Guthrie, that's who I was trying to think of. Yeah, their songs, folk music was defined as music that talked about what was going on either politically or societally. And Mellencamp to some degree, although he would be, I don't know, probably more rock than folk. James Taylor had his moments, but he was part of the next generation where it was more singer songwriter. Um, Ooh, Dan Weber loves the well pennies. Good choice. Um, so there you go. That's what I've got to say about sounding current. It's all that stuff, and this simply the best thing you can do is go to Spotify and find the most current playlist of the genre that you want to do and just listen to that stuff over and over and over. And 2 or 3 weeks later, go look at the same list because things will have changed. Listen to it over and over and over. You could look at the Billboard, top 40, Hot 100, and just absorb, absorb, absorb. All right. On to our next thing. I can't believe it's 4:36. Man, I can talk a lot about nothing. Quarantini topic: copyright infringements. What constitutes a steal or a ripoff? What makes a song unique? The melody, the harmony. What is the real purpose of the Copyright Office? Is it essential to register with the Copyright Office? Pierre, those are a lot of questions, and I want to state right now, right here, up front, before I answer any of this, I am not a lawyer. Thank goodness for that. Otherwise, I'd have to charge you guys $500 an hour. All right. My personal observation, having been in the industry now for 40 some years, is that the vast, 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 vast majority of copyright infringement suits are almost always levied at giant, deep-pocketed hit artists. I think that you never hear about a copyright suit where, like one of you guys, somebody who's not Paul McCartney or Stevie Wonder or whomever, just a regular street level musician, for lack of a better way to describe you. That may not be kind, but I don't mean it to be unkind. You guys wouldn't sue each other because there's no money there. There was a lady taxi member that about a year ago was calling me, and she said, there's a TV commercial out. I want to say it was like a bossa nova thing, and it was for a big product. And she said, they ripped off my thing, and I submitted it to taxi. I'm curious to know if you forwarded it to any ad agencies, because clearly somebody in New York heard my piece of music and copied it, and then this ad agency put out this commercial with a piece of music that sounds remarkably similar to mine. Well, it wasn't bossa nova. It was some other form of Latin music that I can't remember. Anyway, there was a little bit of a similarity. Did it have a nylon string guitar playing basically a 1-4-5 pattern at a similar tempo? Yeah, but it was a 1-4-5 pattern, which is used in probably 25% of all music or something. I'm trying to think it had other similarities, but I played it for a couple of big publishers that I know, and they said she'd never win a suit. She claimed that she had a musicologist check it out, and he said, yeah, absolutely, it was a ripoff. And as it turned out, the company that did the music for the commercial was an advertising music company in New York City that Taxi had no connections to whatsoever. But she was just digging and digging. Well, maybe somebody you forwarded it to played it for somebody who worked at that music company, and there were no lyrics. So that makes it even harder. Something that's a 1-4-5. Musicologist is actually a job. They get called. It's not the only thing they do, but sometimes they get called to testify in copyright infringement suits. So while there were some similarities, there was solid logic as to why there were similarities, which made me think, and the publishers that I had listened to it and a couple of taxi screeners think, yeah, this was more like a happy accident where there's some similarities, but it wasn't a ripoff. So, to answer the question, what constitutes stealing or ripoff? It's beyond my scope to answer that well for you. But I know that, first of all, there's got to be opportunity. It's entirely possible that somebody, in New Jersey and somebody in Hong Kong could write a piece of music that's remarkably similar, having never met the other person, having never laid hands on the other person's music, having never heard it in any way, shape, or form. It's entirely possible. Like I said, there aren't that many notes. So it's got to be a certain number of bars, virtually identical melody, melody and lyric. Now, if you've got a virtually identical melody and a virtually identical lyric, then you may have something. So, yeah, and out of all the big copyright infringement suits that take place at that higher, like Paul McCartney, Stevie Wonder level, I think that those suits are often settled just to, even though they may not be guilty, may not have stood up in court, that, $250,000 to make somebody go away for Paul McCartney is not, that'd be like us, writing a check for $20 or something. So rather than going through the hassle, the embarrassment, and the time, that's what they do. What's the real purpose of the Copyright Office? The real purpose, like I said yesterday, you own the copyright. The minute you take a piece of music and put it on paper, put it on any medium, whether it's a videotape or an audio tape or on paper, it's technically copyrighted. But the copyright is pretty meaningless unless you can prove that you did it at a certain point in time. And that's what the Copyright Office is for. It's basically, it's a bank or a library of copyright registrations. The registration is the key. So you can, prove who you are, what you wrote, and when you wrote it. Because, like I mentioned once before, not that long ago, an old friend of mine, somebody I worked with in the studio that I gave a free taxi membership to, called up 6 months or so into his membership, screaming at me in the phone that Tim McGraw had a single that just came out on radio, and it was virtually identical to a song that this gentleman submitted through Taxi. We must have aided and abetted in the, absconding of his song and the copyright infringement. Yeah, when you get that phone call, your heart goes into your mouth. It's like, holy crap, I don't want a lawsuit and have to spend a couple $100,000 right now just because we forwarded somebody's song and somebody else ripped it off, but we're involved in the chain. That's why we keep incredibly copious records that literally go back to day number 1 in 1992. We're really here to support you guys should there ever be a legit infringement. We've got a record of that stuff. So in this case, turns out that the guy who thought Tim McGraw stole his song, Tim McGraw wasn't recording his own song. He recorded a song written by a Nashville hit songwriter or two. I can't remember which song it was, but it turns out that they had actually written their song and registered the copyright before my friend that I gave the free membership to had written his song. So I warned him he better watch out and hope that those songwriters don't come after him. I think Cass's observation is right on the money. And he says, I would think most lawsuits are now regarding using loops of someone else's previous recording. Yep, that sounds about right. Yeah, like I said, I am not a music attorney. Aaron Jacobson, E-R-I-N, Jacobson, J-A-C-O-B-S-O-N. Aaron Jacobson has become a good friend of mine over the years. Many taxi members use her as an attorney. I don't recommend her because she is a friend. She became a friend And I use her sometimes as my own attorney for music-related stuff. She's good. She's knowledgeable. She's thorough. She's not cheap. She's not expensive. I think her price is fair market. She's well respected in the industry. I've never met anybody that wasn't happy with her work. I think her website is themusicindustrylawyer.com. And I'm sure that if you go to her website, she's probably got many articles on what constitutes a copyright infringement. And the question ended with, is it essential to register to the Copyright Office? Well, that's a matter of opinion depending on which taxi member you speak to. There are rocks and there are diamonds. If what you've created is a rock, which I would, and I don't mean this in any sort of bad way, I'm just having a tough time coming up with a better analogy. A rock is like an instrumental cue. It's somewhat disposable. It's not your grand opus. It's not going to be a hit song. And a single instrumental cue in its lifetime may generate a few $100s, maybe a few $1,000s. It's not going to generate hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, unless by some incredible act of God, your instrumental cue gets picked up for a show, like, the theme song for Seinfeld. In that case, it would be worth quite a bit of money. But that happens so rarely. That's like, 3 times in our lifetimes might that happen. So odds are that your instrumental cues are not that valuable. In aggregate, they are. If you've got hundreds of them or several thousand of them in aggregate, they're going to end up making you more money over the long run than a lot of rock stars retire with. Now, on the other hand, the diamond at the other end, you got the rock over here and you got the diamond. Rock over here, diamond over here, and blurriness right there. Come back. Why, there I am. Oh no, I have something fuzzy on my face. A diamond is worth registering the copyright because you're going to hang on to that and probably pitch it at major label artists. It has the potential, at least with that intent in mind, that someday it could be a hit on the radio or a hit on the internet. And you want to make sure that if somebody infringes your copyright on that you've registered it so that you've got that registration to hold up in court and go, look, Your Honor, I registered this song on this date. It's my work. There you go. I own it, not that guy. There are many music libraries that ultimately end up with the publisher's share of your composition. Therefore, they would much prefer to register the copyright, because if you register the copyright in advance, and by the way, registering copyrights on instrumental cues could get quite expensive. So most people don't do it. Again, I'm not speaking as an attorney. I'm just speaking from what I've heard through the grapevine. But libraries oftentimes copyright stuff, and so they would prefer that you don't copyright, because then you have to modify the registration or transfer the registration. It's costly, it's time-consuming, and it just adds more work. So there you go. If you are in the business of doing instrumental cues, I would talk to other members about how they feel about copyright or registering their copyrights. Let's see. And then finally, oh good, I've got just enough time to answer this probably, although this one's from Dan Weber. And Dan, I'm having a bit of a hard time understanding the question. It's one that you posted, I believe, today. I finally figured out some libraries don't want to screw a relationship with a new writer by telling them, quote unquote, I don't need any more music from you. So libraries don't want to mess up a relationship with a new writer by saying, I don't need any more music from you. Question, isn't it better to not hold back punches? On whose part? I don't understand that part. Are you saying that the library owner should be upfront with you and say, I don't love your stuff. I don't need any more music from you. Is that what you're saying, Dan? I meant the library. Okay, so you meant the library should not hold back punches. They should be forthright with you rather than being vague and beating around the bush because you might get more valuable information, which I think is the gist of what you're asking here. Um, am I getting that correct, Dan? That's what you mean is that you would hope that libraries would always be forthright, and even when it's bad news, break the bad news so that you know, so that you can learn from the experience and move forward. Oh my gosh, there's a crow standing on my chair out there. Bad crow. Um, you know, rarely are they ever going to tell you anything other than, I love this and I want to sign it. That crow is standing by our back door. Go away, you're distracting me. I can't do television when I have birds afoot. He's like literally walking up to the back door looking in the house. Sorry, crow, no food. Um, they don't want to take the time. So, I don't think that they're going to say, sorry, I don't want any music from you. They're just going to ignore you and know and hope that you've heard through that grapevine that that's what's typical. If they don't want music from you, they just don't respond. Now, that said, sometimes they might respond a year later. We had one case that I've mentioned before where they responded 7 years later. Sometimes they reach out to Taxi or in any capacity. It doesn't have to be through Taxi. And they're, looking for XYZ kind of music. Maybe it's like original Christmas instrumentals, let's say. And they get a bunch in, and the third thing they listen to out of 40 or 50 or 100 is one that they love, and that suits the purpose. They pitch it to the show, and it happens to get a placement. They haven't listened to the rest of the stuff. But they don't want to throw that folder of music away because they know, especially if it comes from us, there are probably some other gems in there. So they would probably keep that folder of music called Christmas Instrumentals from Taxi somewhere in their stash of stuff on their computer. And someday when they get, now a crow is nipping at my tomato plant. All right. We have a crow situation. I'm sorry. It's hard not to get distracted. Maybe I should go back to working with the drape shut. Um, so, I know it's frustrating for you guys. It's got to be horribly frustrating. You get forwarded by Taxi to a library and you don't hear anything. And you think, well, does that mean it's still in contention? Does that mean they don't want it? I'm sure it's frustrating, and it leads to another question, which is, if it was forwarded to one library, can I pitch it to others? Abso-frickin-lutely. Pitch that sucker all the time. Don't sit by the phone waiting for the first library to call or email you. Just keep pitching it. The worst thing that could happen, which ain't that bad, is that a library could reach out to you, 45 days later and say, hey, Bob, I would love to license or include that song, your Christmas instrumental in my catalog. And you go, oh, shoot, I'm sorry. I hadn't heard back from you yet. And I was still submitting it for other opportunities. And it got signed by another company. However, I can make more of that stuff. Would you like me to send you some in a few days? And their answer is probably going to be yes. Hi, honey. Man, between my wife and the crows, I don't know if I can finish this show. The distractions are just horrible today. Anyway, so yeah, just don't worry about it. Don't expect to hear feedback. Some libraries, there are moments where they get generous with their time and their knowledge, and they may reach out to you and say, this is pretty good. I kind of like it, but it's not there yet. The mix is unbalanced, or this or that, the other thing. But they're not in the business of being your teacher or your mentor. Usually it's after you've developed a relationship with them and you've got something that's very close to what they want. At that point, they may reach out to you and say, I really like this. I think I can use it in the catalog. However, you would need to remix it. Let's see. Pierre says, recently I sent a song to a publisher. After a long wait, I was told another one was interested in it. Curiously, they answered back very swiftly. There you go. Yeah, the old, oh, there's an expression for it. I can't think of what it is, but, urgency comes from, there's a phrase for it. Just throw your shoe at the crow. I'm going to throw my shoe at my wife in a moment. She's distracting me while Deb, we've only got 5 more minutes for me to do this. Oh, I'm in trouble now for that shoe comment. I'm in big trouble. Anyway, where was I? Fear of losing out. Yes. There's an expression for that. FOMO, fear of missing out. Yeah, FOMO may create a sense of urgency with somebody so that they then act more swiftly than they might have otherwise done. So there you go. All right, 5 minutes left before I go strangle a crow and then proceed to get strangled by my wife. If I ever threw a shoe at my wife, I'd be in such trouble. Big trouble. Bonsai on the crow. Yeah, I am not a lover of crows. Not at all. But I like them better than gophers. Crow making Bloody Mary mix. Yeah, one of the tomato plants, we thought it was supposed to produce big tomatoes, like grapefruit-sized, big, giant, honking tomatoes. Everything's coming out the size of a ping pong ball or a golf ball. I moved it out of its pot. It was in a big pot, but I moved it out of there, planted it out in the yard, and with some fertilizer and some very, healthy soil. And the plant's doing well, but the tomatoes are still small. So maybe it was just mislabeled. Be nice to your wife day. I try. So there you go. And you got 3 minutes left. Any other questions before we start getting our party on for the weekend? Maybe bigger next year. Takes time to mature. Well, that would be the only thing at this house that's mature, speaking for myself. Yeah, one of the other plants is cranking out some good size, like the size of a navel orange tomatoes. Those are pretty big. Yeah, these look like large cherry tomatoes. Mislabeling is not unusual in huge plant nurseries. I mean, this has to be, my wife keeps saying, you must be doing something wrong. They're really little. What are my weekend plans? My weekend plan is I'm looking over at the Rodecaster, is trying to figure out why the noise floor is high and why there's latency. And I got to start working on road rally stuff. All right, Andre, have a good gig. Yeah, there's a show on Monday. Monday's show is a music library that has signed and gotten placements for a ton of taxi members, has become a close friend of mine over the years. And one day, not that long ago, like 6 weeks ago, he called me up one night and he goes, oh my gosh, these people are driving me crazy with some of the dumb things they do. All this teaching you do on Taxi TV, at the Road Rally, and the newsletter, all this stuff, and they're still committing these same mistakes that you talk about till you're blue in the face. And I said, why don't you talk about it? Actually, no, he said to me, can I do a Taxi TV where I do the do's and the don'ts and the business etiquette stuff? And I said, please be my guest. Does that mean I don't have to do any research? I don't have to do any writing? All I have to do is get you on the phone and you will just spill your guts for 90 minutes. And he said, yep. So I just spoke to him about 3 hours ago. He is in fact confirmed for Monday. He's going to be a mystery music supervisor because he's a little fearful that people who may see the show after you guys may start calling him saying, so what about this or what about that? Thinking he's the shell answer man, which he does not want to be. Lohan Frere says, is it possible to make good songs while high? The answer that, even though I don't endorse drug use, the answer is absolutely. There were so many classic songs written. Look at Fleetwood Mac Rumors. Think about anything done in the 70s. Not only were people high, they were high on all kinds of drugs. So yes, and I was actually in the room for a lot of big records where people thought that they were, coming up with the most amazing thing because they were high, and it sucked. So there's that too. Um, yeah, look at Bob Marley. There you go, Cass. Told you guys, I worked for a few days with Bob Marley and the Wailers. Those dudes walked into the control room. Each of them had like an Adidas gym bag filled with like, a pound or a kilo of loose weed in the bag. They each rolled up like foot-long spliffs, fired them up. I mean, it was the only time I think in my life I ever got a screaming contact high. Like, oh my God, the kind where you want to hold onto the bed and go, please, dear God, let me come down soon. That's how high you got just breathing the air in the control room when you worked with Bob Marley. I wonder, did they write them sober sometimes, though? Well, Eric Clapton got sober and wrote some great stuff after the fact. Um, During the live road rally, can you bring a guest so they can also sign into the virtual road rally? Yeah, I'm a little confused by the question, but the answer is yes. You will be able to invite a guest to come to the virtual road rally. Okay, that's it. I am so excited to get on with the weekend. Thank you guys for hanging out with me all week this week. Liz, you're doing great. See you guys on Monday. Please don't miss the Monday show. I think there's going to be a lot of great information. And just so you know, this guy is a composer like you guys, a musician, not just a composer. So he comes from both sides of the fence, and he's not looking to tear anybody a new one. He's just looking to not waste his time with people making dopey mistakes. All right. So, thanks, Lohan. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye. See you next time for another incredibly exciting episode of Taxi TV. Bye, you guys.